Hello everyone, this is Angelo and I'm here to talk to you about playtesting today. Particularly how to improve your playtesting by following some tips that I'm about to give you. I have studied game design and actually my research was on top of playtesting, so I have uh, some academic experience on this. And on top of that, I'm also a board game designer and a video game designer. I've worked on these two video games while I've been working with Cambrinus. So I have practical experience working on a small indie company or by myself as well. Some of this stuff will not be applicable to big big studios, but for indie developers or people who are just starting, this should be helpful. To start with, um, I always think that game development is a lot like baking. However, most of the times we don't actually have a recipe. Like, let's say you want to make a chocolate cake like the one in the photograph, but you don't have a recipe. Many times we just guess what the ingredients are. Are there gonna be eggs in it? Is there baking powder? Like, if you are an experienced game developer, you can probably guess. If you are someone who is just starting, you may miss some important ingredient and mess up the recipe. So, if you make the recipe, while you are making it, you can probably taste the butter and get a sense of what the cake is gonna look like. However, you won't know until the cake is baked and finished. And then, is this a recipe that you can make mass produce to sell? You have to try it and you have to try it yourself and then ask friends to try it. A friend might tell you it would be better with less sugar or that it's too dry. This last part of asking friends is what playtesting is. You are testing to see whether this recipe worked before you can mass produce it. And you need to ask other people's opinion. Your opinion is not enough. Because for a game development, most of the times is iterative. That means we go through these circles of designing something that we guess is good, we make it into a prototype, but then we need to playtest this big step. Playtesting will help us evaluate and improve. And we go through this loop many times before we get to a point where the game can be released. As you see, playtesting is a core part of this loop. And the main goal of playtesting is to improve your game. The main path to get there is to gather actionable feedback and to validate assumptions. I want to analyze these two. Gathering actionable feedback means that you get information on what the player liked or didn't like, whether it was easy or difficult, whether they got into the flow, whether they laughed, or whatever else. Actionable, though, is the feedback that you can actually use to change your game. If, for example, a player tells you they don't like the art style, but you're like a week before release, there's nothing you can do about it. So it is important to find ways to get feedback that you can afterwards take action from. Validating assumptions is you having heard that there is a problem on a level, you go back through the iteration, you make a change, and then you test it again to validate that the change you made fixes the problem. Many times it will not, and you will have to go back, try again, and then validate again, and fail again, and try again, and then eventually you will see that this works. For example, I remember we were prototyping a tutorial, and there were like 6 or 7 players who wouldn't see something, and then eventually, after many changes, when a player finally saw it, I was like, "Woohoo! Yes, they saw it! Yes!" That's the life of a playtesting session. Secondary goal. So, the main goal is to improve your game. While you are running a playtesting session, you can try to achieve some of these secondary goals, but they're not the main. If you only succeed in collecting bug reports but don't get feedback on the game, then you run a QA session. It's not a playtesting session. If you manage to get some market research but you didn't get a chance to validate assumptions, then you did, you did a market research session. But my opinion is that for small indie companies, while you have a playtester and you're showing them the game, you can ask them a few questions about the audience and you can capture a few bugs. People in bigger AAA companies, they find this probably weird because they have QA departments, they have marketing departments. However, in Gambians, we have 5 people. We have to wear many hats. So I end up doing some of this, but not as a main focus again. It's a secondary goal. Something that playtesting should not be is you trying to sell the game. If you ask someone to playtest your game and then you're pushing them to buy it, then you are ruining their experience. They came to give you their honest opinion. They gave to get a sense of the game. They might buy it, they might not, but a playtesting session should not be used for pitching your game to possible buyers. Use something else. Use a demo. It shouldn't be a playtesting session that the goal is to improve your game. And also, it's a bad habit for some people to run a playtesting to get like an ego boost, to get some personal validation. That's not helpful. That won't help you improve the game, which is the main goal of the playtesting session. Okay, now I'm gonna speed through 24 best practices out of my personal experience, and we can discuss them one by one, and we'll come back to the goals that we discussed just now. So, first of all, you should identify what stage your game is at, because you need different things based from out of the playtesting based on what stage your game is at. When it's very early, you don't need to see whether there is game balance. You don't need to see whether the animations work great or the sound is great. You need to see whether this idea is promising, whether this is worth pursuing, whether this prototype is worth working on, or it should be benched. So you have different questions to ask whether the game is on early stage, or if it's on the middle stage, something like alpha, where you want to see if the game is actually coming together or not, whether each system by themselves is good enough. And then late stage, you want to see if all the systems, all the different parts of the game are coming together properly to create a full experience. You ask different questions based on the stage. Also, it's very important to choose the correct playtesting type. There are 3 main types that I'm mentioning here. Guided is where you're sitting behind the playtester and you tell them things. Try clicking on this, or in order to jump over this, you need to press this button. This is fine. You kind of have to do this for very early playtesting when you don't have a tutorial where the game is not easily explained, and you have to be there. The player will get stuck easily. That's fine. Guided is a valid thing to do very early at playtesting. Observed is my personal favorite. It's what I find gives me the best feedback. It's when the playtester is playing by themselves. I watch, I observe, but I stay mostly silent. I'm the biggest fan of this. The third type is what some people call blind, I call unobserved, which is you give the game to people and they play themselves. You don't know what's going on. They send you back feedback, maybe through a feedback form. This is best if you want to test with hundreds of thousands of people at the same time. You won't get as good feedback as you get with Observe, but Observe, obviously, you have to be there. You have to have someone at the right time. So it's more complicated and more to organize and more engaged. And you can't mass run observed sessions. So you need to choose what's best for you at the stage. Obviously, the last type is good when you are close to launch where you can run a beta, open a demo on your store and get some better information from this. This term is for first time user experience or repeat playtesting. When someone plays your game for the first time, this is usually the most valuable feedback you'll get. If someone has already played your game once, your feedback will not be as valuable. That's why personally, I try to constantly search for new people to try my game. The first time testers will give you better feedback on UX issues, on whether they can learn the game, on whether the controls work, on their first impressions. Repeat playtesters are also valuable because they will give you better feedback on balance, on what strategies they can help you come up with exploits. UX or user experience. I'm not a professional user experience designer, but we are a small team. There's no one else to do UX. I'm the game designer. I have to do some UX. Okay. I recommend game designers to at least understand the basics. When I started playtesting, I thought that the main goal was to work on my game balance, fixing numbers, finding the correct options to give the players. Boy, was I wrong. The biggest blocker on whether players will enjoy the game or not is not balance. It's whether they'll actually understand the game, they'll understand the tools, the controls, what the game tries to communicate with them. And this is UX, verifying that players understand what they can do. Now, take some steps to prepare before you go into your playtesting. Make sure your build is working. Have a notebook to keep in your notes. If you are play testing remotely, I often ask my playtesters to download the build beforehand, before our time, so that we can start immediately without any delays. It's important to create a positive atmosphere. I personally often start my playtest saying, just so you know, the game is crap, but with your help, we can make it better. This means that I don't have an attachment to how the game is. I'm open to their feedback. The more open the playtesters are, more comfortable to give me feedback when they know that I don't think it's perfect. And it's important to encourage them and thank them even before they start. It's also important before you jump into the game to learn a few things about them. The feedback you collect is sometimes unusable if you don't know who your playtester is. I often ask the questions that I have here because, for example, if I'm making a Hearthstone game and the player has played Hearthstone before or has never played Hearthstone before, then the feedback is going to be completely different. I really need to know what's going on. Now, once the play starts, this is assuming an observed playtest, where, as I said, I'm not telling the player, click this, go there, do that. Very, very important for this to work. Some companies have observers behind glass, and they might spend an hour watching a player failing to do a simple task or clicking on something that flashes on the screen. I personally don't believe in such extreme measures. If a player has a problem, I try to identify what it is, give them a couple of minutes to see if they will figure out themselves, but after a few minutes I will intervene and unblock them so they can continue further down. I do this mostly out of respect for their time, for the playtesters' time. If I already have the actionable feedback that I need from observing them for 3 minutes, then I don't need to let them suffer for an hour and not have a good time and not get feedback further down. Bigger companies that playtest with a lot more people have that opportunity. For us indies, I try I allow myself to interrupt to improve the flow and to respect the playtesters' time. Keeping notes during play. I often keep more notes during play than afterwards when I ask players questions and have a small interview with them. Usually my best feedback is from observed play, where I note whether a player missed something that happened, where they clicked somewhere where they shouldn't have, or where they clicked something they should have. I'm noting on things that I have been assuming and whether I validate all them. And a very important thing that I note is how players react. The best note I have kept ever in my playtesting is when, as you can say, that a player laughed at this point, or whenever the player expressed any emotion. Which is why when we are playtesting remotely, I always ask my playtesters to share their screen and their camera. It's very important to see what the player who is seeing the game, sometimes for the first time, how they take it, because you as a game developer knows the game off by heart, has played the game hundreds of times. You need to see it from the eyes of someone else, and you should keep notes while that's happening. These are some things that I try to note. Start and end time really helps to know how far they went, and how engaging the game is. What ended the test, whether there was a crash or the player get bored, what version to reference later. Now, once the play is over and we stop playing, if I would ask them a specific question, I would never hear their raw, undiluted feedback of what made the most impression to them. That is why the first question I always ask, and I suggest you do too, is, so what do you think? Let them speak freely. And they will tell you what is the most important for them at the start. Once they don't have much more to say, then I jump in and start asking some questions to clarify or to drill deeper into what they're thinking. But often they will cover a lot of the topics I had already in mind. And sometimes they will cover topics that I never considered. That's why you shouldn't only ask questions. Let them speak freely. Focusing on problems, not on solutions. This is a key aspect of playtesting. I'm going to give you an example. A playtester says that a specific boss is difficult to beat and the boss should be nerfed. However, the player never found the boss's weak point and they try to brute force through the boss. So the player suggests a solution, which is to nerf the boss, but they do not explain that their problem is that they can't beat the boss. A better solution to the same problem would be to make the weak point more obvious. And then test again and see whether players still have the same problem or the problem of this boss is too hard is solved. So try to focus on what your problem is and get that down. Also note the suggested solution, but you should have your mind open about what the solution is. Additionally to that, sometimes you might already have in your mind, this problem I have an idea already. You can, after you noted them down and after you identify the problem together, you can ask the player, hey, what do you think that if we did this, would that solve your problem? That helps. Sometimes you'll hear yes, sometimes you hear no. It's good to note everything down. Also, it's good to ask and it's good to note what went well. Sometimes feedback notes out of playtesting can be negative because we focus on how to improve the game. However, it helps a lot to understand the best elements of your game. That's what you can use to grab the attention. That's what That's what you can use to market your game. That's what you can try to bring more into your game to use to use those best parts better and earlier. For example, in Catpocalypse, we got feedback that the best part of the game starts happening once you're about halfway in. And some players never got to see that fun and thought that the game is boring because the good stuff happens later. In retrospect, yes, we should have changed the story to introduce the best part earlier if we had this feedback earlier. Right, now, after the open conversation where you ask them what's going on, it's good to have some prepared questions to ask them, to ask the playtesters specifically. I often ask the rest of my team what they want to learn, because often they're not there at the playtest, and then I ask the questions that they need. I ask about different aspects of the game. What did you think about the writing? What do you think about the graphics? What do you think about the sound? What do you think about the amount of text? What did you think about the tutorial? Whatever you're working on, it's also good to go into a test to have 2 or 3 topics in mind that you really want to see, that you really want to validate. Quantitative versus qualitative questions. That is a touchy topic, and there are different approaches to it. A quantitative question is how much do you like the game from 1 to 10. If you are doing an observed tests and you are asking players to fill a feedback form, you often get this. You can often you end up using these questions. They can be helpful in some specific situations. When you are comparing different versions of the game, so you can see whether this average goes up and down over time. And B, if you can ask them, why is that? If someone tells you, what do you think about the graphics? 8 out of 10, then that is a good conversation starter. Okay, it's 8 out of 10. Why do you say that? How would you give this a bigger score? What would you like to see improved? That's a good that's a good reason to use quantitative questions. Qualitative questions are things that start with why, how, what do you think, instead of asking for a specific number. They are the ones that will give you the most information, but also they might be a bit harder to capture, and they're not as easy to compare, as I said earlier. So ask why, and whether it's quantitative or qualitative, and then once someone says why, and ask why is that. Drill into what they're saying as much as you can with asking multiple whys. Here are some example of good questions that you can use that I've used a lot in my playtesting. What is unclear? This is about UX. How was the pacing? This helps a lot. This will be different for different players. And be prepared to hear different answers from different players. Then it comes back to you and your team to decide what to do with that. Keep notes of everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Sometimes I think that there's more than 2 occasions where I thought, that's interesting, but we're not going to do it. I noted it down. And then 1 or 2 more players say the same thing. Then it's like, you know what? If so many people are saying it, maybe there's something to it. Maybe we should consider it. It's good to note everything and store it and be able to compare notes later. As we said earlier, remember the user experience, understand what problems are caused by user experience, that player didn't understand something, the game tried to communicate something to the player, then didn't understand it. Or if it's other reasons. Stay flexible. You will get better feedback if you really listen to what the playtester says and you ask questions adjusted to what they're saying. The questions that you have prepared shouldn't be a script. Go off script and note things that they will lead you to places that you didn't consider, and that's where you actually want to be. As I said earlier, while you're there, it's secondary, but capture a few bugs. I feel that if a player says, hey, this is a bug, and I don't note it, I'm being a bit disrespectful to their time. That's why I have a section in my notes. I keep the bugs there, and I think it makes players feel more appreciated if you actually note the bugs. Similarly, not the main goal, secondary goal, but while you're having conversation, ask, would you buy this? Would you recommend it to friends? If you recommend to friends, which type of friends? You'll be surprised how much you learn when money is on the line. And remember to thank them at the end and ask them if they want to be mentioned in the credits and how to write their name when you do that. That makes them feel appreciated. They'll playtest for you again, and they'll be more open for playtesting other games in the future for other playtesters. So, in the same vein, I also thank you for listening. That's my Twitter. Feel free to follow me and to ask me questions there or in the chat.